Hi, I'm Scott Mansell and welcome to Driver 61's definitive circuit guide to the Sepang International Circuit. Sepang is 5.5 kilometres and 15 turns of challenging corners and long straights. It's one of Tilke's best designed circuits and it's such a shame that it's off the Formula One calendar. In this circuit guide, I'm going to take an in-depth look at everything you need to know to be quick around the Sepang circuit. Although I've done a lot of driving at Sepang, I don't have any HD footage, so we're using footage from a driver called Dan Wells who has spent a lot of time at the Sepang circuit. He's also an instructor, so if you're over in Asia and you want some tuition, get in contact with Dan. I'll link to his website in the description below. If you're new to Driver 61, be sure to check out driver61.com where you'll find in-depth tutorials about driving technique designed to make you faster on the circuit. We also have a motorsports store, so if you need any racewear or car equipment, please check it out. So without further ado, let's head into the onboard footage with Dan. So here we are on board with Dan Wells in a Formula Renault car. We're heading down towards turn 1. Now, turn 1 is a more than 180-degree corner around to the right. So the really important thing is, as it's such a slow speed corner, is that we're as late on the brakes as we possibly can be. So we're going to take a look in depth at the braking references and how we can be late on the brakes into turn 1. So just heading down now, you can see on the left hand side we do have some braking references. We have a 200 meter board here, a 150 meter board here, and then a little bit further on the 100 meter board further down. So if you're new to Sepang, the idea of a braking reference is so that you can be conscious of where you braked on the previous lap, and if you slowed the car down too much or not enough, you know how to adjust your braking point for the following lap. So if you slowed the car down too early and you braked at 250 meters, you know that you can probably go a little bit deeper and carry a little bit more speed into the corner. You continue to do this until you find the perfect braking point when you're carrying exactly the right speed into turn 1. So we've got the 150 meter board here on the left, we've got the 100 meter board just here, which is probably where Dan's braking in this high downforce Formula Renault car. So we're keeping the car over to the left at this point, but as you can see, he's bringing the car in towards the apex, or the first apex, quite early. Now the reason for this is because we have a 180 degree corner like this, and he's bringing the car across. We're going to V the corner off in this section here, and then propel ourselves into this area before we go through the left-hander of turn 2. Now, some racing schools say that in a hairpin corner you should go out wide, keep it wide, and then slowly bring the car into a really late apex. Now, the problem with this is that you can't brake as late, but you also add a number of meters onto your distance around the circuit, which obviously costs you some time. So Dan's doing exactly the right thing here. He's going to bring the car into the apex, then let the car push wide somewhere about a third of the way away from the inside of the track. Stop the car, or make it slow down quite a lot, get the car turned, and then accelerate up towards turn 2. Bringing the car down into that apex nice and early. You can see here that he's bringing the car into the first apex. We're not using any of the curb on the inside. Now this is a dynamic thing. If he'd have slowed the car down a little bit more, he probably would have used a little bit of curb. If he hadn't have slowed the car down quite as well as this and had come in a little bit too quick, he would have been a little bit further out and used a little bit more of the road. The important thing in a big braking zone like this, where we've had a long straight and then a very slow corner, is that we're as late on the brakes as we possibly can be. So we're letting the car now push wide, and you can see Dan's got a bit of understeer in the steering. You can see his hand here. He's got a bit of understeer and he's just waiting for the car to grip up and come back in. Another important thing is if you look at the direction of where he's looking in this area here, because that's his next apex. He's looking where he needs to be. So the important thing is when you're driving on any circuit, and if you haven't already, please watch the Drivers University tutorial on vision. I think it's tutorial number 3. It's the most important fundamental technique that you'll learn about driving, is that you need to look a long way ahead of yourself. You need to look at the next stage of the lap. So at this point, he's in the middle of the corner, he's looking across at the next apex that he needs to be at. So now he's allowing the car to grip up and come back into that second apex, and we're going to see him drive and use a little bit more of the curb on the inside. Now, all of the curbs at Sepang are pretty much the same. We have this first stage of curb, which you can run on in any car, single seater, sports prototype, and especially GT cars. And then you have this second phase of curb, which is a little bit more aggressive. Now these curbs are FIA spec, so they're all fairly flat, they're all fairly smooth. Obviously you'll feel it through the steering wheel, but they're not massive curbs like we used to get on the circuits in Europe. So they're completely safe and quick for you to run on. So Dan's got the car back over to the right hand side. If you just look at his positioning now, he's about a quarter of the track's width away from the outside here. And that's the perfect positioning before we go into turn 2. If you're too far over to the left, you've come through turn 1 too quickly, and it's really going to restrict turn 2 and then restrict your exit coming out of turn 2. If you're in this section of track just here, it means that you've not come through turn 1 quick enough, and actually it doesn't save you any time coming into turn 2. So if you're on the inside part of the track in this area, try and carry a bit more speed through turn 1. Now the interesting thing about turn 2, and you've probably seen it when you've been watching racing at Sepang, is that the track falls away very quickly just before the apex. And as you come into here, you pick up a bit of understeer, and then as the car compresses, the car changes completely dynamically. So it's a little bit difficult. And what you have to do is bring the car into the apex, come over the crest, let the car compress before you then get on the accelerator. So Dan's doing all of this very well. He's bringing the car, and you can see it's picked up just a bit of understeer at this point, and he's bringing the car onto the curb on the inside. And again, he's just using this first stage of the curb on the left hand side here, like he did in turn 1. At this point you can see that his head is turned and he's looking in this area of the track. So he's looking for the extremity of the track, he's looking for the curb on the outside, so he knows when he can get on the throttle and how hard he can get on the throttle. And this is important in this area because in the Formula Renault, turn 3 is flat out before we then get to turn 4. So it's quite a good period of track where he's not lifting off the accelerator. He's flat out through all this area. So the more speed that he carries out of this corner, he'll then carry down the next part of the track and he'll decrease his lap time. So he's coming out of turn 2, letting the car run nice and wide here as we're coming up towards turn 3. You can see he's using the curb on the right hand side here again. It's nice and flat, there isn't, it's not too rough, so you can run on it in whatever car that you're racing. And turn 3 will be easy flat in this Formula Renault. However, in some cars that have more power and less grip, like a GT car for example, turn 3 can be quite challenging. So maybe you'll try to get the car a little bit further over to the left, maybe in this area of the circuit, so that you can open up turn 3 a little bit more and perhaps keep it flat through there and carry a higher minimum speed. As you can see, coming into turn 3, there isn't really a reference on the inside of the circuit, so vision is critically important at this point. You need to be looking through the corner, looking at the apex here, and then looking further along for the exit point as we're coming out of the corner. Just look at the direction of Dan's helmet here. He's looking across the circuit in this area, and that's exactly what you need to be doing. You need to physically be looking quite a long way ahead of yourself. Then it's just a case of letting the car run all the way to the exit curbing. Now, turn 3 is easy in this Formula Renault, as I've explained, so he doesn't need to use any of the exit curbing on the outside. And then it's a short run down to turn 4. Now, turn 4 is quite a simple corner, to be honest. It's a 90-degree right, big curb on the inside that we can take. And on the left-hand side here, we've got some good braking references. We've got a 150 metre board, a 100 metre board, and the orange patch, which is the gap in the barrier just on the left-hand side. Again, we're only using these references in our peripheral vision. We need to have our focus on the apex, on the inside, so we know how much speed and when to turn into the next corner. So we're getting on the brakes coming into turn 4, decelerating the car. Now you can see already that Dan's head has moved across and is already looking at the apex. So this is just to show you exactly when you should be looking ahead. So always remember that you need to be looking in the next section of track. So when you're on the brakes, you're looking at the apex. Just before you get to the apex, you're already looking for the exit point. And if you do all of those, your racing line will come together so well and so naturally. It makes such a big difference to your lap time. So Dan's bringing the car into the apex of turn 4. Now you can see, if I stop the video at this point, the first part of the curb is unlike any of the curb that we've seen so far. It's actually just a smooth curb, smooth concrete. Yes, it does elevate slightly, but it's just a smooth curb. It's not rough at all. And then beyond that, in this area here, we've got grass crating. Now you can see that the grass is completely worn away. So Dan's not using any of the grass crating because the Formula Renault is so low that if he does, it will touch the floor and destabilise the car. This grass crating has been worn away by saloon cars and GT cars that have that higher ride height. It can accept bigger bumps in the road better than a single seater can. So if you're on a track day or in a GT car or a saloon car, you should be using a bit more of the road, a bit more of the curb here to open up the angle of the corner of turn 4 as much as you possibly can. So from this point on, Dan is already looking around here, looking for the exit point, so he knows when he can get back on the accelerator. And as we come out of turn 4, we're just letting the car run onto the curb. And again, you can see here that it's a very smooth curb. Yes, it does have a slight angle in it, but the curb is smooth, so you can run up onto that. And if you want to use a bit more of the road here, you can. You can see again that the grass crating has been rubbed away by everybody running so wide off the circuit. So if you want to open up the angle of the corner as much as possible, which is what we want to do to carry the maximum speed that we can through there, use a bit more of that road on the outside. Obviously, if you're in a single seater or some sports prototypes cars, you don't want to be running up onto something that's a bit of a lump. With such low ride height, they can get caught on the floor here and it can destabilize the car and unsettle the car. So next we've got a run slightly uphill. If you're new to Sepang, this part can be quite difficult because you can't see where the circuit's going. But you need to be, as you come under the gantry just here, you need to be somewhere in the middle of the road. So at this point, you need to be somewhere in the middle of the road just so you can guide. But once you've done a few laps, you'll know exactly where you need to be. So we're heading uphill, just coming over the crest now. And as we come into this section, we're coming into turn 5, which is one of the most difficult corners on the whole circuit of Sepang, if not the most difficult. We need to carry a lot of speed into there, but it's off camber, the track falls away out here, and as you're coming in, the track falls away, but you're also decelerating, so it's a corner that will generate some oversteer, and if you go into there too quickly and get on the brakes, you can very easily have a spin. So you need to build up to turn 5, to being quick through turn 5, very steadily, because it can easily catch you out. Dan's bringing the car in now. He'll be super smooth in how he's coming off the accelerator. With this Formula Renault, with the wings and the aero that it has, he'll be able to carry a lot of speed into here. But anything that you do, whether you're in a saloon car or a GT car, any movements on the accelerator, because you'll be back on a constant throttle within the middle of the corner here, you need to do very, very smooth. If you're on and off the throttle like this, the weight transfer of the car will be moving around a lot, and you'll be moving the grip of the car around and the balance of the car around, and that isn't what you want in this very difficult corner. If you don't understand what weight transfer or load transfer does to a car, please visit the Drivers University and check out the load transfer video there that explains how you can manage the weight of a car and how you can manipulate the balance of it. So we're coming into the apex here, and it's a long, long way around the corner. There isn't really any references for the apex here. So it's something that you really need to have some experience with and have some laps around the Sepang circuit before you know exactly where you should be. The important thing here is that you're looking a long way ahead, so you have the most time to make the best decisions about where your car should be positioned. So Dan's brought the car in, and you can see that he's still hanging onto the apex here at the end of the curb. So that's probably the best marker on this part of the circuit as to know that you're somewhere in the regions of the right line. You need to be still hanging onto the curb on the left, just as it ends coming through turn 5. Next up, we've got turn 6, which is directly after turn 5, and it's important that we carry good speed through here. You can see in the middle part of the corner, Dan's somewhere in the middle of the track, and his vision is already across, looking at the apex of turn 6. It's a tricky one. You don't have to decelerate too much coming out of turn 5 to go into turn 6, but it will definitely be a lift or a slight brake as you're coming into turn 6. So we're coming in, and again, Dan's got his vision forward. We're going to be using a lot of the curb on the inside. You can see here that it's very smooth for the first part, and then the second section of the curb is a bit more rough. But what's important here is that you've got your vision a long way ahead. There aren't really any proper references to know exactly where you should be, so that's why you need to have your vision nice and broad, taking in as much information from the road as you possibly can. So from this point forwards, we need to have our vision up, looking for the extremity of the circuit, the outside curb. Now it is quite difficult to see. The circuit's so flat here that it's quite difficult to see the exit. But you get different markers. You can see all the rubber on the outside here. So it depends on what the circuit's like when you arrive there. Maybe we don't have the rubber down like we do in this video, but generally when there's been a race meetings or testings, there will be rubber on the outside of the circuit here. So you can use that as a bit of a guide as to check your positioning on the circuit. So we're letting the car run all the way to the outside here, and again you can see that Dan's using all of the curb on the outside. It's quite a rough curb on the outside here, but even a single seater will accept it and it's completely fine to run on it. Beyond that, again, we have the grass crating. So if you're in a GT car or a saloon car, you can run on this and it won't cause you too many issues. So now we've got a short run down to turns 7 and 8. It's a very tricky part of the circuit, and you'll need to decelerate the car, you'll need to get on the brakes, but there aren't many references as you come down here, so it's very tricky to know where to brake. It's a braking area where it's not a big braking zone, it's a small braking zone because we don't need to slow the car down too much, but it's one that's done from rhythm, from knowing how you exit turn 6, the previous corner, how long it takes, and then get on the brakes. It's a complete kind of rhythm. You feel like you just know when to brake. There aren't any references, so this is all that you can do. You can see already that Dan's got his vision across the apex here. So again, really important that you're looking a long way ahead of yourself on this Sepang circuit. He's bringing the car in towards the apex here, bringing it in, and you'll see here that he's not making too much of the curb. Now, if you do take too much of this curb, it can really unsettle the car quite a lot and push you wide, which then pushes you off the track on the exit, and which means you can't get back in for turn 8. Now, some GT cars and saloon cars will be able to take this curb, no problems, without destabilising the car. So it's really up to you to see how much of the curbs and how much of each curb your car will accept without unsettling it and causing any issues, any oversteer, any understeer, and making you run wide from the circuit. So running out wide at this point, you can see just here that Dan's got a bit of oversteer. He's probably carried the brake into the corner a little bit too far, which has caused the car to rotate. And it's important here that we're getting back on the accelerator as soon as possible. You can see that we're not using all of the circuit on the outside here. Now the reason is we're going directly into turn 8, and if you're using all the track on the outside here, you won't be able to get the car back into turn 8. So if your natural line is to run outright right up to the curb, that isn't the right line, because it means that you'll miss this next apex up on the right hand side here. So we want to be 2, 3, 4 meters away from the outside of the track here before we then tuck the car back into turn 8. Once you've got the car turned and set up for turn 8, it's just a case of bringing the car into the apex, having your vision a long way ahead of yourself, looking for that apex on the inside. But once you've made it, you can then get on the throttle quite hard to propel yourself down the next straight. And again, in a single seater, in a sports prototype car, we're not taking much of this curb on the inside. It will destabilise and unsettle the car too much. But again, in a GT car, saloon car, track day car, you'll be able to take a bit more of this curb. So we're letting the car run out wide here up to the exit curb, and it's actually quite an aggressive curb. What's interesting here on the exit of turn 8 is that we've got the first part of the curb is flat and quite aggressive, but after that, the second part of the curb, it drops away. So if you You can easily use the first part of the curb, and that's completely fine. You want to open up the corner as much as possible. But the second part of the curb drops away like this. So if you fall onto it, it pulls the car over to the left, and then it's more difficult to get back on the track, and it all feels very uncomfortable and is a bit slower. So it's actually quite a good technique from the circuit design so that you don't run too wide. So just use that first half of the curb, don't use the second half, and you'll be absolutely fine on the run down to turn 9. So next up, we've got a short straight on the run down to turn 9, which is a tight left-hand corner, second gear in most cars. And we're running down here. Here we want to use a braking reference. So we've got a number of options. First of all, we've got this slip road on the right hand side. Now the closer a braking reference is to you, the better, because it's easier to see it in your peripheral vision. And then we've got the marks on the wall here. We've got the white mark just there. We've got the braking marker just here. And as we go a bit further down, we've also got another white mark on the board here at just before the 50 metre mark. Now if you're getting down to the 50 metre bar, you'll be in a Formula Renault or a Radical or something that can brake super late. Most braking points will be well before that. So we're on the brakes here coming down into turn 9. We've got the entry curb on the right hand side here, but don't get using any of that. And as you can see here, Dan's got his head looking across at the apex of turn 9 here. So it's important that you're looking across, ready to go into turn 9, so that we know when to get off the brakes, we know when to turn into the corner, and how much speed we should be carrying into there. Now one important thing here is, if you do make a mistake, you're not really going to get away with it. There's a little bit of grass just here, and then we've got some gravel. So if you're really working on your braking point, don't do it into turn 9, because the consequences or the risk, if you do brake that little bit too late, will be the end of the session or the end of your race. So we're coming into turn 9 here, and what you can see here is that the circuit actually goes uphill in this section quite steeply. So as you bring the car into the apex, and just after you get to the apex, there's a crest in the circuit, and the car will naturally want to oversteer as you're getting on the throttle. It's a bit of an oversteer generating corner. Bringing the car into the apex, and you can see here that Dan's taken a reasonable amount of curb. It's quite a lot actually in this Formula Renault, and you can see on the inside that the grass crating's been rubbed away, so the GT cars and the saloon cars are using all of the curb here. So use a bit of the curb if you're in a single seater or a prototype, and use all of it, and probably a bit of the grass crating if you're in a GT car. We want to be getting on the throttle as soon as possible coming out of here, and you can see that Dan's just playing with the steering wheel here. You can see him moving it around a little bit, which means that the rear of the car is light and just beginning to rotate as he's getting on the throttle. He does a reasonable job, keeps it nice and tidy, and doesn't, interestingly here, use the curb on the outside here. Now the reason for that is, if you come out of turn 9 and you're using all of the road over here, the next section of track into turn 10 is really, really challenging, because you're accelerating through turn 10, and as you're coming through there, the car's moving around, and it seems like it doesn't matter what kind of car you're in. I've driven many cars at the Sepang Circuit, but whatever car you're in, turn 10 is just on the limit of being just about flat out or needing a little bit of a lift. It's a really challenging corner. So if you do use the curb on the right hand side here, the likeliness is that you won't be able to make it through turn 10 flat out. So it's a bit of a compromise. You're going to have to see what the quickest line is in your car. If you're in something that's got lots of grip and is underpowered, yes, you'll be able to use all this curb over here, because then turn 10 won't be that difficult anyway. But if you're in a car that has a reasonable amount of grip and a reasonable amount of power, then you probably won't be able to use the curb on the right hand side, and you'll have to restrict yourself here so that you can carry a bit more speed through turn 10. So we continue in uphill here through turn 10. You can see Dan's vision is looking a long way ahead just up here. Now we've got a really challenging turn 11, because turn 10 is difficult anyway. It's difficult to keep it flat through here, but you can see that the circuit continues to turn before we then tighten up and go into turn 11. Now that's tricky, because we've already got steering angle in the car. The car's already sitting over, and we need to get on the brakes and turn the car into turn 11. And it's really tricky when you're on the brakes, because as you know, if you're turning and braking, all the weight goes to the front outside wheel, and it can cause the car to oversteer. So we're letting the car push towards the outside here. The other thing that's tricky is that we don't really have a braking reference for coming into turn 10. So again, it's something that you need to do through rhythm, experience, and just knowing exactly where the car is positioned on the Sepang circuit. So you can see we're letting the car push to the outside. We're on the brakes in this area. Dan's got his head looking all the way across, looking for that apex on the inside, so he knows how much speed he can carry into turn 11. And at this point here, we'll be coming off the brakes. You can see, and at this point here, we'll be coming off the brakes and we're just looking towards the apex on the inside, trying to balance the car. It's really tricky to get the car into turn 11. And he's got it perfectly on the apex here. You can see, again, we've got one of those smooth curbs on the inside of turn 11. And then we've also got a bit of the grass worn away here. So those saloon cars and the GT cars are using a bit more track than they really should. But in this single seater, Dan's on exactly the perfect line, and we want to be getting back on the accelerator as soon as we possibly can. Vision looking towards the outside of the circuit, looking for this curb on the outside, being careful not to make any mistakes because there's only a little bit of grass crating on the outside here before you're in the gravel. Once we're through turn 11, we've got to get the car back across for the high speed 12 and 13. Really challenging part of the Sepang circuit. So we're getting back over to the right hand side, and turn 12 in every car that I've been in at Sepang is very challenging and very quick. Some cars it's just about flat out, other cars you need a bit of a brake, but whatever is very quick. So whatever you do with your car on the entry to here needs to be very, very smooth. We don't want any harsh movements on the brake, no harsh movements with the steering. Everything needs to be very, very delicate. If you're in a car where it's just a slight lift, you need to make sure that your lift off the accelerator is very, very smooth. And again, this is also, we don't transfer too much weight to the outside of the car as we're entering, which could cause some oversteer and unsettle the car. So importantly, we've got our vision all the way down here at the apex, and we're gently turning the car in. You can see that the track's falling away. We're going downhill slightly and there's off camber, so it's really easy to make a mistake. Bringing it in towards the apex, Dan had a bit of oversteer there, and you can see this is where we're making the apex, where the grass is rubbed away, as with all the other corners. That's how you can see where the apex is. We made the apex here, and Dan will be getting back on the accelerator. Now, on the exit of turn 12, you can see that we're pushing the car out, letting it run out naturally all the way out here. Now we've got quite a lot of curb here, but again, as with turn 8, it's flat for a little while and then it falls away. So you can use half of it in this section here, but if you use this section, you actually fall off the track and it will lose you quite a lot of time in this area because you can't get back onto the circuit. So yes, use a little bit of curb here, but not too much. Give yourself a little bit of safety margin so you can get back on the throttle consistently each lap. So then we're coming up to turn 13 and 14, which is probably the most technically difficult parts of the track. We've got the quick right-hander that's just coming up, and then it tightens up and tightens up into a sharp right-hander. So we're coming through the quick right-hander, we've got steering angle in the car, and then we need to get on the brakes, get the car turned while it's trying to decelerate as well, and get ourselves into the apex of turn 14. So Dan's using the bit of curb on the right hand side here. Now we're letting the car push out a little bit. Now we're not using all of the road on the outside. If you use all of the road at this point, you'll run out of road out here. So we don't want to be too wide. Dan's on the perfect line here. We want to end up somewhere around here before we bring the car into the apex of turn 14. You can see here that what he's done is turn the car, and even though the car's not straight, he's trying to decrease the amount of steering angle in the car here. When you have a straighter car, it means that the braking will be more efficient because less of the grip is being used for turning. That means you can decelerate the car more quickly, get it stopped quicker, get it turned into turn 14 and get through the corner. So we're letting the car push out slightly here. Look at his vision, he's looking all the way across here. It's critically important here that we're not just looking in front of the car. We need to be looking across at the apex so we know exactly how much speed we can take into the corner and what racing line we should be on. Sepang's a very technical circuit and it's critically important that your vision is in the right area. So he's letting the car push out. We're not all the way on the outside yet, but we're pretty much all the way there. He's got his vision looking across, and at this point he'll be getting off the brakes. So if we just back up a little bit, when we're getting on the brakes, around this point, depending on the car that you're in, we want to have the car as straight as possible. We'll never get it fully straight, because if it's straight, we'll go off the track. So we'll have a little bit of steering angle in it, but we don't want lots in it, just a little bit. And when we first get on the brakes, that initial brake pressure needs to be smooth. If you stamp on the brakes at this point with steering angle in the car will rotate or it'll lock a front up. Whatever it isn't what we want to happen. So the initial pressure when we move the weight to the front of the car wants to be smooth, especially in this area of the track. So we load it up smoothly and then we have more control with the weight transfer of the car. So we're letting the car push to the outside, we're controlling the car with the brake pressure, nice and smooth. Got our vision across at the apex now, as you can see. And now Dan will be coming off the brakes and rolling the speed into the apex here at turn 14. Now you can see that it's the apex. There's quite a lot of rubber on the inside here. Now obviously that gets washed away when it rains, but it will generally build up back in the same place. So bringing the car in towards the apex, and the whole aim now is to get on the throttle as soon as we possibly can, because we've got a long straight before we get down to turn 15. Getting on the throttle as soon as you possibly can, letting the car push out wide. Again, he's going to be using all the curb. It's reasonably flat here and you can use quite a lot of it. You can see that there's grass crating on the outside, and then as we move forward just a little bit, the curb actually comes back in, so be careful that that doesn't catch you out if you're running onto the grass crating. Dan's timed it pretty well and is coming back onto the circuit and has propelled himself well down the straight towards turn 15. A good opportunity to check your water temperatures, your oil temperatures, check your delta, anything that you might need to check in the cars. If you're racing, it's a good time to check your mirrors, because this is obviously quite a big overtaking spot. But the previous part of the circuit was so busy that we don't get the opportunity to look at the critical points of the car. So take this time to check your mirrors and all the temperatures on the car. If there is somebody behind you in a race, keep the car over to the left hand side, because if they get a good tow, if they get a good slipstream coming down this back straight, then they'll have to go to the outside of you, because turn 15 is a left-hander. So keep the car over to the left just until you know if someone's got a good run on you, and then you can bring the car back over to the right if it's all right to do so as we're coming up towards turn 15. So turn 15 is another 180-degree hairpin, this time to the left. It's really important again to be as late on the brakes as we possibly can, and the one thing to note is that there's a bit of runoff, a bit of tarmac on the outside. So if you do lock up, if you do make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can run into this tarmac, and yes, you'll lose some time, but in testing or on a track day, if you're trying to find the ultimate braking point, you can push yourself that little bit further, safe in the knowledge that there's a bit of tarmac on the outside of the corner. Now, coming down to turn 15, there are quite a lot of braking references very close to the circuit, so it is quite easy to find that ultimate braking point and edge yourself forwards each lap until you find the perfect point. First of all, we've got this black strip on the right hand side coming out of the secondary pits at Sepang. Then of course you've got the start of this entrance curb on the right hand side. Now obviously I'm showing you all of these different braking references because I don't know if you're in a saloon car that might not slow down very quickly, or a radical that will stop very quickly, or a Formula Renault like Dan's in here. So they're all important. What's important is that you find one, you see how late you can brake, and you just, if you can brake later, you just go a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper, a little bit deeper each lap until you find the optimum spot. The next braking reference is where the other part of the circuit breaks away here, and this will be a very late braking point. So as you can see here now, Dan's moving his head, he's already looking for the apex here, so he's on the brakes, looking across, looking for the apex, so he knows when to turn in, when he can come back off the brake pedal again. And again, as with turn 1, as we spoke about, we'll V this corner off a little bit. We'll dive across the circuit, as you can see Dan is doing here. We'll Bring the car somewhere in the middle of the track here, and it's off camber here now. The track falls away very, very quickly. So he's kind of missed the first apex. He's gone really deep to make sure that we're super late on the brakes. And at this point here, he's looking across at the apex where that other car is in front of us, and he'll be lifting off the accelerator just to get the car to turn again. Once the front's gripped up, then we'll get it turned, get back on the throttle and accelerate down the start-finish straight. Super late on the brakes there, you can see just locked up slightly. He's waiting for the grip to come back to the car, picking up the apex late in the corner, and now he's back on the throttle already. And he's got his vision all the way out here, looking probably just in front of where that other car is. Letting the car push to the outside, back on the throttle, as we head down towards the start-finish straight. So that's all for the definitive circuit guide to Sepang. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you're a sim, track day or racing driver, be sure to check out the Driver 61 University, where you can learn about trail braking, weight transfer and vision. If you need any racewear or motorsport parts, be sure to check out the driver61.com store. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button below, and if you're not already a subscriber, please subscribe to the Driver 61 channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.